Good morning, everyone. I'm Bob Hornstein. I'm the Director of Community Relations and Public Affairs for the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland. Thank you for joining us on this early morning. This is a continuation of our Voices from Israel series, which I hope you have found to be interesting and informative, as I'm sure today's program will be as well. Actually, next week will be our final in the series. We will be hearing from IDF Colonel Kobi Marom, who will give us his analysis of where things stand in Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza. I want to remind everyone that we are going to disable the chat function. So if you have questions, and I hope that you'll hold your questions until, say, 20, 25 minutes in. So please use the Q&A function if you do have a question, and our speaker will respond to that. So one of the complaints that we hear often within the American Jewish community, within the pro-Israel community, is that Israel has bad PR, that it has difficulty making its case in the Western media, in the world, and we're going to find out today whether in fact that is the case. Our speaker today will address the challenges that Israel faces in getting its word out in the court of public opinion. So Gil Hoffman is the executive director of HonestReporting, which has the very important function of fighting for Israel in the international mainstream and social media. He served for 24 years as the chief political correspondent and analyst for the Jerusalem Post, where he is now a regular columnist, and he will explain how you can look up his columns if you're interested in reading those. The Allgemeiner website recently named Gil as one of the top 100 people positively influencing Jewish life, alongside Presidents Biden and Zelensky. Gil has lectured in all major English-speaking countries in the world, more than half the Canadian provinces, and recently he made history in Hawaii by becoming the first Israel speaker to have lectured in all 50 states. And I'm sure he's going to tell us today that his favorite state among all 50, of course, is Oregon. Well, maybe second to Hawaii. But Gil has actually been here in person lecturing here in Portland on at least a couple occasions. So we're really honored to have him now virtually. Gil Hoffman.
Thank you so much, Bob. I do still wear my shirt that's green that says Oregon in Hebrew in yellow writing. And I did have a wonderful experience both times that I've come to your beautiful city and state. And I also had a wonderful experience in December when many of your leaders came here to Jerusalem and showed solidarity with the people of Israel, which I know was very much appreciated. I just came back from a speaking tour in America where I went to the other coast, and you never know what you're going to get on the plane when El Al has a monopoly right now. And so I had sitting next to me on the plane a Cocker Spaniel. Um, you never know what you're going to get. So it was important to me before I left on that speaking tour to be able to explain what's really going on. And I had already been to the communities in the Gaza periphery in Israel, the kibbutzim that were massacred on October 7th. And I'm glad that people in your community have visited them and to bear witness. But I called up a cousin who was serving in Gaza and who I knew had been through a lot, and asked him if he has any stories or anything. And he said, "Well, why should I tell you anything? Just come." And I thought he was kidding. And so I talked to him for a bit, and then at the end of the conversation, he says, "Okay, 9:30 in the morning Monday, be there at the fence." And then he adds, "Just ask permission from the IDF." So I called up the right person in the Army who said, "No, try back in a couple days." And I tried back in a couple days, and then the Army guy said, no, the chief of staff of the army is coming exactly to that place tomorrow, so no, you can't. And then there was one night left before I was getting on the plane. And so I asked really nicely, this is my last chance. I'm going to be talking to all kinds of really important Jews in America and then back in Israel when I'll be doing a Zoom for the people of Portland. And um, they said no. Um, Next time I'll ask Libby Weiss from Portland. People from Portland are nicer. But I called up my cousin all dejected and said they're not letting me in. And his answer was, screw them, they won't know, just come. And so I did. And I'm glad that I did because it coming to Gaza changed my point of view that I had until then. Until then, what I'd been saying is that we have some surprising successes on the media battlefield, but on the military battlefield, it's not going too well. And the reason why I was saying that was because our soldiers have not yet gotten to the top heads of Hamas, and they have not yet freed the captives. The amount of captives that we have freed is only three hostages, and that is not nearly enough. There are 132 left, of which more than 100 may be alive. Please God, we don't know. Um, but going there, I got to see what had been accomplished. It's important to keep in mind the other side had been preparing for this war for 20 years, and especially for the last 16 years after they overthrew the Palestinian leadership in Gaza. And Hamas, since then, has been building the ultimate terror fortress out of Gaza at the expense of its citizens. What they've managed to build up there, 80% of the houses had either guns or rocket launchers or rockets being stored there or entrances to tunnels. 80%. 100% of the schools. Um, Everywhere you went, there was a connection. And to get rid of so much of that, you might not think quickly, but really, compared to other armies around the world, how fast they managed to clear so much terror infrastructure. It was absolutely incredible. 95% of the rockets are gone. They had 20,000 ready to go the morning of October 7th. They fired 9,000, then made it over the border, another 4,000 that did not make it over the border and killed their own people. Of course, those numbers are included in the numbers that they say Israel killed. And but Israel went through systematically ridding Gaza and clearing it. So soon the civilian population will be able to go back and hopefully build a much better life than they had there. It's important to keep in mind where we were on October 6th. The Palestinians were about to have a huge boost in their quality of life. The big news in the weeks before that was the Biden administration moving forward with the Saudi agreement with Israel that called for doubling the amount of Gazan workers coming into Israel by the end of the negotiations and might have even been tripling, which would have improved the Palestinian economy in Gaza tremendously. And Israel wanted this. Israel was pushing for this. Israel had already agreed. And that's what the Iranians wanted to stop by getting their proxies to attack us on October 7th. And so where were we in Israel? We in Israel were not ready at all. We were still busy fighting each other over judicial reform and matters of religion and state. A few days before on Yom Kippur, Jews came to physical blows about whether to have a prayer divider in an outdoor prayer in Tel Aviv. We were on the way to our 13th civil war in the history of the Jewish people. That's where we were. And I had a briefing from Netanyahu's chief of staff on October 6th at 2 p.m. Bad math, 16 hours before we were invaded from Gaza. And when I asked him about the different security threats, and we finally got to Hamas, the word that he used was restrained. They hadn't participated in the previous 3 wars between Israel and Islamic Jihad. Maybe they're out of the terror business. Um, they're not to be worried about anymore. That's where Israel was coming from. So to come back from that is actually quite impressive. Now, let's put into perspective, this was my 4th time visiting Gaza. My first time was back as a teenager on an Israel program. One of the perks of the program was they took us for a weekend to a resort that was called the Palm Beach Hotel. Now, I know when you think of Gaza, you don't really think of white sandy beaches, but they're there. And no one's ever taken advantage of them properly. Um, the second time, so it was a very positive experience. The second time I came as a journalist. I covered politics for a quarter century, and I went where the politicians went, and a group of left-wing politicians went to visit the Palestinian leader, Yasser Arafat, at his palace in Gaza to try to make peace with him. And I remember it like it was yesterday. Number one, because on the way in, they make you leave your phone outside the palace because Israel's used cell phones as remote controls to kill terrorists before. And on the way out, I forgot to take my phone, which led to a Palestinian general and an Israeli general who hadn't met in several months meeting that day to get back my phone. And the other reason why it feels like it was yesterday was because halfway through, they kicked the journalists out. So Arafat could meet alone with the politicians. And I saw as I'm leaving, the New York Times lady isn't leaving the room. She's pretending to be the daughter of one of the members of Knesset, and Arafat was kissing her on the forehead like she's a little girl. And I remember losing a little respect for the New York Times already back then. The third time I came was as a soldier. I shifted from my artillery unit where I did my basic training to do my reserve duty in Dover Tzahal, the spokesman's unit of the army. And I wanted to help Israel against its enemies, but I didn't get called up for that. I got called up for the withdrawal from Gaza. Uh, Israelis fighting other Israelis. And so I got assigned to take around a couple VIP journalists, one from the New York Times and one from Fox together. Don't worry, they got along. They were even married and still are. And opposites attract sometimes, I guess. Um, and I remember we were talking at the time about how Gaza could become the Singapore of the Middle East. And it could have. It could have. Until Hamas overthrew the leaders of the Palestinians and committed all the resources that should have been going to the people of Gaza to killing us. That's clearly all they care about, and the Palestinians really do deserve better. Hamas does not care about creating a Palestinian state. They oppose a two-state solution. All they care about is maximizing deaths on our side, and they're maximizing deaths on the other side too. And we in Israel are trying to help. It might not come out in the media so much, but we in Israel are trying to help the Palestinians in Gaza because we're not at war with them. We're at war with Hamas. So since the beginning of the year, not since October 7th, since January 1st. So sorry, since the beginning of the war, I misread. So since October 7th, there have been 252,270 tons of aid that were sent from Israel into Gaza in 13,721 trucks. That's amazing. That's what we're doing, and half of it gets stolen by Hamas and doesn't get to the people. So we hope, though, that the protests that there have been among the Gazan people against Hamas will intensify. There have been protests saying, down with Hamas, let us go home and let them go home. They want to go back to where they live uh, throughout Gaza, and they want to let the hostages go home because they know that that has to happen first. And the moment that Hamas surrenders, this war is over, and there's no better time to do it than over the next 2 weeks before Ramadan begins. Um, Only a little bit of Khan Yunis and Rafah, the fighting just began, are left from all of Gaza. Um, and that's pretty incredible. If you would have asked me if I would have told you on October 6th that President Biden was going to let Netanyahu go to war in Gaza for 138 days, you would have told me I'm crazy. But it's happened. And so how has it happened that the war has been allowed to go on for so long? Previous wars, the international community got Israel to stop them after 3 days. So the most obvious answer is that it was so horrible, the atrocities that there were on that day, going to a dance festival and murdering 364 people dancing, and going from community to community, killing elderly people and Holocaust survivors and raping them and filming it live for their families to watch, and all the disgusting things that they did. The second reason is because the world leaders, if not the people, realize that terror has to be defeated. A proxy of Iran has to be defeated, or terror will upswing in their countries, and there'll be more September 11th. There'll be more 7/7s. There'll be more attacks like there were in Paris in the Bataclan, where 2 days ago the crowd started screaming "Free Palestine," which we were trying to do. We were trying to free Palestine from Hamas, and saying that where dozens of people lost their lives from the Islamic terror we're fighting was kind of pathetically ironic. The third reason why I think it's been able to go on for so long is that the people of Israel are united still, which is incredible. There were 5 elections in 3.5 years, and it got pretty intense over here before this war broke out. And the contrast between people screaming at each other in public squares before October 7th and jumping on grenades to save each other's lives after October 7th is incredible, and the world sees it. I would argue, though, that one of the main reasons why this war was not stopped a long time ago and can still achieve its objectives of bringing the hostages home and preventing Hamas or anyone else in Gaza from being able to attack Israel again anytime soon is because there have been successes on the media battlefield. And that includes the social media battlefield that you're probably all involved in and day out. And I salute you for what you're doing. I truly think it's that each and every one of you is making a difference on Facebook, Instagram, Telegram, X/Twitter, Snapchat, and TikTok is the most important, unfortunately. And LinkedIn counts, the one place where the Jews have somewhat of a majority, or at least the pro-Israel people do. So thank you for all you're doing. Now, I would argue, and some can disagree, that the Israeli army has also done a lot better in this war than they've ever done before. There have been enough horror stories in the past of Israel being accused of all kinds of terrible things and either not reacting or reacting way too late. May of 2021, there was a war in Gaza, and Israel destroyed a tower that housed the offices of Al Jazeera and the Associated Press. They gave an hour for everybody to leave, so no one would be hurt, which no army in the history of mankind ever did before. And that hour also gave them time to film it from every possible angle, and Israel looked terrible around the world. It took way too long for the heads of the army to agree to let the spokespeople say, by the way, That was the cyber tower of Hamas. It was jamming Iron Dome, and taking it down saved countless lives. Um, by the time they said it, the war was over and no one was paying any attention around the world. That mistake was so bad that they formed a whole unit in the army to prevent such incidents from happening again. Um, Fast forward to this war. Okay, November 15th or whatever, they said that uh, uh, that we destroyed a tower. Excuse me, that we destroyed a hospital. We killed 500 people, and that most of them are women and children, um, and that Israel's done something really, really terrible, as if they could know how many people were killed in a matter of minutes. Um, and know exactly who they were. There was a building that came down in Surfside in Florida, and it took them weeks to know. But the world took this information as if it was gospel coming from Jesus, and they already knew exactly how many people were harmed. So that I know made Israel look really bad around the world. It led to violent protests, and it would have been wonderful if it would have taken the army 4 seconds to tell the world what happened. It took 4 hours, and that is a lot better than 4 weeks. Um, and so the Army's gotten better at what they do. The Chief of Staff of the Army and the Commander of the Air Force were up all night until they had the correct information out there. And in the past, there's no way that they would be involved or woken up or even care about this happening. But the current leadership of the army realizes that winning on the media battlefield is the key to winning on the military battlefield, and that is very, very important that they get that. So there's also what's been happening in the media, regardless of the army. You know, the BBC apologized twice in one day. BBC's been around for 150 years. They'd never apologized twice in one day before. Um, in the morning, they reported that the Israeli army had gone into a hospital in Gaza in order to target Arabic speakers and medical personnel. And an hour later, they came on and they apologized. They said, actually, what the Israeli army did was come in with soldiers who are Arabic speakers and medical personnel in order to minimize harm to people at the hospital when they went to arrest wanted terrorists. Now, that same day, they reported that 10,000 people attended a rally in Washington, which is true. There were 10,000 people there. There were another 290 other thousand people there. So the BBC apologized twice in one day. Then there's what Honest Reporting has done. My organization has been around for more than 20 years. For most of that time, it focused on the mainstream media and didn't get a lot done. I joined in July of 2022, and since then, I made it a lot more aggressive. And since I joined, we've gotten 8 Hitler and Hamas praising anti-Semitic journalists fired or suspended, including 2 from CNN, 2 from AP, and 3 from the New York Times. Back in August of 2022, there was a war in Gaza, and it lasted only 2.5 days, as they tended to do. And so when it was over, I asked my team, hey, who covered this war? There's no freedom of the press in Gaza. And they found that the person who covered the war for the New York Times, Fadi Hanona, had written on his social media, Jews are sons of dogs, and I'm in favor of killing them, including the elderly and the young, like Hitler did. Needless to say, he lost his job after we revealed that. And then we found 2 more from the New York Times. We found a guy Hossam Salman had praised the terrorist attack in Jerusalem in a synagogue that was the model for Pittsburgh and Poway and Christchurch and Copenhagen and houses of worship around the world. And we found a guy named Suleiman Hiji who also praised Hitler. He was fired from his job at the New York Times because of this in August of 2022. He was rehired on October the 8th because the New York Times said when they were questioned, hey, he violated our guidelines last year. This year he won't. Until people started writing on social media, hey, the New York Times rehired a Nazi to cover a war of annihilation against the Jews? And we haven't seen his byline since then. Same thing with a guy named Issam Adwan who was writing for AP, who said the Jews are Nazis in English and have to be annihilated a few months before the war. And then we started questioning, who are these photographers who made their way across the border on October 7th, who took pictures? These events were really early that day. How did they know? How did they get there? And it turned out that one of the photographers we just raised questions about, Hassan Asliach, pictures were found of him together with Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, and he was fired from his jobs at AP and at CNN. And then there was a Reuters guy who we caught just doing it. We found a video of him on Instagram Live from October 7th, bragging about how he went into Israel that morning. It was there from the beginning, and went into Sderot and took back the men and killed the dogs. And he's telling the people, there's still time, go in right now, go get settler women and do whatever you want with them. He is still employed by Reuters, last time we checked. And so this is what we've been up against, and we've been trying to stop. I mean, that photographer's pictures of a soldier being dragged out of a tank were the cover of the pictures of the year of 2023. And we needed to highlight this to the world. So the other thing that I changed when I joined Honest Reporting is instead of focusing on mainstream media, we've been focusing on social media. 4 million people saw our stuff in 2022. In 2023, it was 123 million, of which 45% are under 25 and 89% are under 45. So we're getting out of our echo chamber. Now, why does that matter? The answer is because if we're not going to change the journalists, we have to change the news consumers. And when we were growing up, I can't believe I'm starting a sentence like that, but when we were growing up, when we needed basic facts, we went to an encyclopedia. Kids nowadays have never heard of such a thing. Nowadays, when we need to find basic facts, we Google it. But people under 30, 51% of them use TikTok as their search engine. And if you Google what is Zionism, then then mostly what you see is Wikipedia, dictionary.com, things that aren't too problematic. But if you TikTok what is Zionism, you get things with a hashtag Free Palestine or a hashtag Allahu Akbar. And it's no wonder why in November a poll found that a majority of young people think that the October 7th attacks were justified and that Hamas is a legitimate resistance organization. Thankfully, the numbers have changed dramatically since then. As people are educating, we among them. So progress is being made in changing minds by speaking to the young people in their own language and without being patronizing. So they've shared the posts that Honest Reporting has put out. I'm sure posts you guys have put out and shared, and that's very important. So what I want to end with is what you can do. First of all, when I'm speaking to people from other cities in America, and it happens to be that I speak lately, I've spent way too much time in New York. I'm from Chicago. I'm not a New York fan, but I spent a lot of time there. I had to say, don't cancel your subscription to the New York Times. And they're all shocked. We all canceled our print subscription because we want to help Israel. Does the Oregonian still come out every day in print? Tell me later when you're allowed to react. But don't cancel your subscription, even if it's bad. Um, Read it. And when you see things that are problematic there, please send them to action@honestreporting.com or highlight them on social media on what's wrong so things can get changed. Um, uh, Try to get you should subscribe to get our emails that we send out. Go to honestreporting.com/subscribe. 2 or 3 emails just a week where we go through what the mistakes are in the media over the week. Sign up your children and your grandchildren without asking their permission. Um, and absolutely engage online when you see things that are wrong. Respond in the talkbacks. Um, Over there. Thank you for putting that in the chat. Um, and you never know when you're going to have an Esther moment where you were there in the right place at the right time and had an influence on a young person who might be your senator one day, um, or the president of the United States. There should be one from Oregon. Um, And when there are things that are really, really bad, please report them to Facebook and Instagram and Twitter X, because there have been anti-Israel accounts that have crossed lines that have been removed. There are limits to what you can say, even on social media. And there's someone that inspired me recently. Her name is Taylor Swift. Okay, she didn't just become Times Person of the Year and the most listened to recording artist over the past year and win a Super Bowl. She also fought back successfully against vicious attacks on social media. There were fake AI. Um, uh, Pictures that were supposed to be her and that were not, that were sexually explicit and everything. And her people, her Swifties, they fought and they won. Everything was taken down. That can happen. Um, it can work. And look, there are more Swifties in this world than there are pro-Israel people. There are more Swifties than there are Jews. But still, it's not a reason to not fight the fight. And so I appreciate each and every one of you in the fight that you're fighting. And I know in Portland, it can be an uphill battle. And I really appreciate what Bob is doing over there at the JCRC and his team. So thank you for your support of the Federation over there, that I know goes a long way to help Israel. And that's also something that helps the fight against anti-Semitism too. And my heart goes out to you for any of the challenges that you're going through right now. And please God, things should be better very, very soon for the Israelis, the Palestinians, and the people of your communities as well. Thank you.
Gil, thank you for that really great analysis. I want to spend some time on, obviously, on media coverage of what's happening in Gaza. So I want to start, you mentioned the BBC, and shortly after October 7th, John Simpson, who is the BBC News World Affairs editor, came out and made a statement about why the BBC did not characterize what happened on October 7th as terrorism. And what he said was, basically, we don't take sides. We don't talk about terrorism. How do you respond to that?
If it murders people like a duck, if it rapes people like a duck, and if it kidnaps people like a duck, then it's a terrorist. And um, it's interesting that we even care so much about what they think when people are so far off any logic. A few days into the war, the Prime Minister of England, Rishi Sunak, came to Israel And what was the one request that President Herzog made of him when they met? Was to get the BBC to start using the word terror. And the BBC did come out with a statement after that and say we can say in our articles that the official policy of the United Kingdom is that Hamas is a terrorist organization. That was a big step, even though they didn't carry it out. At least they said they would.
So the thing that drives me most mad, and I find it just intolerable, is the citing of Hamas's numbers, the so-called civilian casualty toll. We knew that shortly after October 7th, the narrative was going to shift away from Israeli trauma and start, calculating these numbers. I want to give you an example. So just the other day, watching a segment on CNN, they were interviewing a former Democratic congressman, a Jewish congressman, who was planning to, in the Michigan primary, vote uncommitted in order to send a message to President Biden because of the 28,000 Palestinians that have been killed so far in this war. And that number, 28,000, just hung out there. There was no mentioning, of course, of what we all know, that Hamas uses these people as human shields. There was no mentioning that Israel has claimed that 12,000, even if you accept the 28,000, that 12,000 of those have been terrorists or combatants. There was nothing to contextualize it. So I have two questions about that, because we hear it all the time. We hear it repeated by elected officials, certainly by pro-Palestinian protesters. Question number one is, what do you believe is the responsibility of a news anchor or a reporter in letting that number hang out there? Should they try to contextualize it? And secondly, can you tell us how is this being covered compared to other wars? For example, our wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, in terms of citing casualty numbers and so on.
Wonderful. I would really appreciate if there was objectivity on the part of anchors. When we were growing up, that was something given. We didn't know who the anchors voted for. And unfortunately, now too many times we do. And it's really gotten out of hand. My CEO met with the former president of NBC, who said that the senior people always taught the young journalists to keep their opinions out of it, and were able to stop it if they ever tried, and they've lost all control now, that they're afraid of getting fired, the leaders, and the young people come in as activists to be journalists, to get their point of view across, and there's really nothing stopping it anymore, and that is a very serious problem. And yes, we have at Honest Reporting analyzed how this conflict has been treated differently than conflicts around the world, and how it's been covered. And America carpet bombed in Afghanistan, and what they did in Japan in World War II is certainly nothing compared to what we're doing now. I can refer you to a fellow named General Spencer at West Point, who is the international expert in the history of warfare, and he's printed in Newsweek and Time about how Israel's done more than any army in the history of mankind to minimize civilian deaths, and that this war can't be compared to any other because it's facing warfare underground that's so much more complicated. We don't have an element of surprise underground, and the amount of hostages that are being used as human shields also make this very, very different than any war that there's ever been. Keep in mind, how many human shields are there? 2.5 million. Because what Israel tried to do was to evacuate civilians into a humanitarian corridor that would be controlled by the United Nations or somebody else, and not Hamas, and the UN refused to cooperate. And so they instead the people were forced by Hamas to go to areas under their control, where they used basically the entire Gazan people as human shields protecting them, and it was that was totally avoidable.
So we have a question from a longtime supporter of honest reporting. She's asking, how do you handle stories about problems in the Israeli press of quote unquote bad behavior in the IDF or bad apples or maybe bad behavior from extremist settlers? How do you handle those situations?
What's her name? This longtime supporter of Honest Reporting.
Ann Bardicke from Vancouver, Washington.
Thank you, Ann Bardicke from Vancouver, Washington. We don't cover Israeli media too much. In fact, we we deal with how Israel's viewed around the world. When there are reports, Israel it has the most critical media of the Israeli government out of any media from any country in the world, and that's a strength of Israeli democracy. But when Israeli reports then get reported around the world that are factually incorrect, that make Israel look terrible, that's when we do get involved. And that happened during this war. The world reported that Israel fired on its own people at the dance festival. And that came from an incorrect report that there was in Haaretz that was refuted by the police shortly after it went online. And we still hear uh, Palestinian Authority leaders say on TV, oh, Palestinians didn't kill 12,000 people. Israel killed 12,000 of its own people because of that one report. And that is uh, the fact that people say things on TV that are so easily proven wrong. And the Hamas filmed themselves killing people. They're proud of it. They don't deny it. Um, that's what we're up against too. I hope that answers her question. It might not have.
So you mentioned there that you believe there's been a shift in opinion, especially among younger people. And you cited, I think it was the Harvard Harris poll, where a majority believe that what happened on October 7th was justified. You said that that's shifted now. Would you have specific statistics that show how it's shifted?
Not in front of me, I'm sorry. But there have been two Harris polls since then that have found that those numbers have gone back down, thank God. And but They were enough to scare people and really justifiably because the young people are the leaders of tomorrow and they need to realize that being progressive means being pro-Israel. And if they don't get that uh, fact, then we're in trouble because I don't know who the next Democratic president is going to be. But it's not going to be someone who, like the current one, was friends with Golda Meir.
That's for sure. So let's get back to coverage. So I saw a clip of an Al Jazeera interview with a Gazan Palestinian who, at the beginning of the interview, was actually criticizing Hamas, and Al Jazeera cut it off immediately. And apparently, this has been happening fairly commonly. So, can you talk about Al Jazeera's coverage? Because I think they're the main media outlet in Gaza, and how Hamas is controlling what the Western media is able to see in this war.
Bob, I don't know how many people on this call trust the state media of China or the state media of Russia. Just to give an example about them momentarily before I get to Al Jazeera. When Netanyahu came back to power in 2009, I was interviewed by RT, the state media of Russia, Putin's channel, and I was one of two analysts explaining why Israelis voted for Netanyahu. The other one that they picked was Noam Chomsky, an expert on the Jews. Noam Chomsky was asked first, he's older than me, his view on why Israelis voted for Netanyahu. And he said, well, Netanyahu has had high-profile fights with Barack Obama, and Barack Obama is black, and Israelis hate black people. So go speak after that, you know. So people don't trust Russian state media and Chinese state media. Why do they trust Qatari state media? Qatar is a country that has an agenda. And part of its agenda, besides taking over college campuses and making them teach all kinds of nasty things that they've done very, very successfully, is that they are trying for many years now to bring down the Palestinian Authority and bring Hamas to power. They've been doing it consistently. They had all kinds of things that made the Palestinian Authority look corrupt, which it is, in order to try to bring the Hamas to power. And during this war, they have been very much a partner with Hamas in making Israel look terrible around the world and trying to make Hamas look positive. And just last week, the IDF revealed two Hamas terrorists who were working for Al Jazeera. One went into Israel on October 7th, took part in the massacre. Another one trained young jihadis. This is Al Jazeera. People need to realize it before they trust what they see from it.
For sure. It seemed like early on, certainly in the first month, some of the Western media outlets, I mean, even the more, say, centrist or left of center, or CNN or MSNBC, they seem to have IDF spokespeople on it. It almost seemed like every news segment. And now we don't see that as much, or that seems to be the impression of a lot of people. Do you know what's going on there? Why aren't we seeing these folks out, out and about speaking to the world media as much as humanly possible?
I did not know that they were speaking less in the army. That could be a question for my friend Libby Weiss from Portland, who is the only woman authorized to speak for the IDF to the media around the world, which is a wonderful accomplishment of her, and I have a lot of respect for her. I hope they interview her more. She went to Northwestern like me, far away from Portland, and now she's even farther away and doing amazing stuff. And look, how long can you keep a reserve soldier on duty? You know, all the reservists have gone home. Right now in Rafah and in Khan Yunis, it's only the standing army of Israel. The last reservists were released on Thursday. So there are only 5 people authorized to speak to the American media by the IDF. I guess they need more, but Peter Lerner and John Conricus and Richard Hecht and Jerome Spielman, not everyone is in the standing army.
Right. Libby's great, by the way. We've heard from her, and I think there should be more female spokespeople for the IDF. I think it would resonate more with world media.
Sure.
So why do you think that Western media doesn't pick up on the stories that are supportive of Israel that we read, certainly in the Israeli media? Things like, IDF findings that you mentioned, that 80% of the buildings, there is either a weapons cache or an entrance to a tunnel. There's the fact that at least 10% of the UNRWA employees are somehow connected to Hamas. The failed rockets, perhaps 30% of Islamic Jihad and Hamas rockets that are being fired are landing in Gaza, killing their own people. Why do you think that the Western media isn't covering those stories?
And we should add what you mentioned before about the protests of ordinary Gazans against their leaders that did not get the play that they should have. After the world media was sent videos by the IDF. The IDF wanted the world to know that this was happening. And Honest Reporting also put it on social media so the world will know. I'll answer as a Cubs fan. I can understand wanting to root for a perceived underdog. But the Cubs aren't really an underdog when they have such a budget that's so huge compared to smaller towns that with owners that are less rich. But still the Cubs are lovable losers, and then they have this image of being underdogs. And the Palestinians also got wisely this image of an underdog. And the world wants to have empathy and sympathy with them, and so do I. I want to help the Palestinian people too. I want them to have a brighter day. I know that they've been harmed by Hamas the same way that we were harmed by Hamas, and we're actually on the same team. But people media outlets around the world, it's just so lazy and easy to take Israel that is receiving so much arms from the United States and view them as this big aggressor and everything, and the Palestinians and Hamas being the victim when they need to really be differentiating between Hamas and the Palestinian people, and they're not doing them justice by not differentiating. And just like we get mad when the world paints us all with one brush, as if we're all European settlers who are wealthy or whatever, and Ashkenazim, when the truth is that more than half the Israelis are from Middle Eastern countries, and Ethiopians and everything. And we have great diversity in income, and more than any country in the world other than the United States. Uh, Gaza also is diverse. People think, oh, Gaza is a poor and open air prison and all that BS. No, there are very wealthy communities in Gaza, and they've been left untouched because they have no terror infrastructure underground or in their houses. I saw myself. And so there's diversity there too.
So we have a question in the Q&A. I hear NPR journalists say they are barred from Gaza. If they were able to get in, would their coverage be more objective?
Okay, so the answer is yes, they are barred from Gaza, and if they would be in, they would be dead. Israel is before 2014 let journalists go in, and it's dangerous. And since then, they don't want to have more Shireen Abu Aklehs, and no journalists have gone in with the IDF embedded to protect them, and they've been taken to see a lot of important things over there. This was a very controversial decision. I'm sure they rethink it every day. I rethink it every day about whether it's smart to bar journalists from going in on their own. Um, because the result has been that the media outlets, except for Al Jazeera and CNN, got Qatari aid shipment got Carissa Ward in there. Um, they rely on Gazan stringers who, let's just say that to get a job as a stringer with AP and Reuters in Gaza is a lot easier than the qualifications than in New York, LA, or Portland. And these some are just ordinary Gazans with cell phones, and that has not made Israel look very good. The people reporting from Israel, including the top journalists from around the world who parachuted in, had freedom of the press. The people reporting from Gaza are under the control of a totalitarian regime with no freedom of the press that kills people day in and day out. And so it's good that the NPR journalist has not been allowed in.
So if we see in local papers, and by the way, I don't subscribe to the Oregonian. There is the Oregon Life online. I believe it prints 3 times a week, if I'm not
Oh,
mistaken.
really? I've been wondering. Thank
But
you.
yeah, but if we see that the numbers that are reported are without any qualifier, uh, what's your advice? Simply write letters to the editor. I mean, what should be done in order to get the attention of those media outlets that just report these figures as if they're actually verifiable?
So, if people are reporting things that are incorrect, whether it's the Oregonian or anywhere else, we can fight it. We at Honest Reporting have relationships with editors around the world, and tell us. I'm Gil at honestreporting.com. We have our email address is action@honestreporting.com, and we can get things changed behind the scenes quietly. We don't have to shame people on social media. We reserve that for things that are particularly egregious or repeat offenders. Um, but you can all do your part. You're all part of this very important team of Israel in getting the correct word out there. And yes, absolutely, go on the websites, be a part of the comment section. I realize it's an uphill battle, but Jews aren't afraid of uphill battles.
Gil, when you speak in this country, do you talk to those outside the Jewish community, to elected officials? Are those outside the Jewish community reading what Honest Reporting is putting out? What's your relationship outside the Jewish community?
Evangelical Christians are nice. They tend to like Israel. But I speak on college campuses, and it's very important to speak to the future leaders of tomorrow that are not Jewish. Journalism departments are also extremely important. And when they have me meet with leaders, I'm glad that I can set them straight. I wish I met the mayor of Chicago before he became the mayor
Mm.
of Chicago, because the one Jew in the city council, she fought like a lioness to get them to stop this bill that they had there to call for a unilateral ceasefire, which is just so immoral. This 4-year-old boy and 1-year-old boy are there. You're voting to keep them in captivity. At least put in your resolution that you want to have the ceasefire happen with the hostages coming home, um, and say some Palestinians, being released from prison in Israel too. Fine, that it's Israel negotiated that in November, willing to negotiate it now, but to call for the city of Chicago's official policy is in favor of keeping that 1-year-old baby in captivity. That's just disgusting. And so I know that you guys have fought similar things in Portland and Oregon and around. And please set them straight while you can. Make them understand what morality is. If they would have been around in the Holocaust, would they be calling for the Americans to stop harming those lovable concentration camps? I mean, it's gross.
Gil, we're almost up against the hour. Any final thoughts from you?
That don't give up hope. The question I was asked when I went around America more than any other was, I post things about Israel all the time and I get 4 likes. And then I post a cute picture of my kid in a Halloween costume looking cute, and I get 700 likes. Well, those same 700 people are seeing your uh, Israel post too, and they're not clicking like because of peer pressure or whatever. They don't want to offend people on the other side, but they're learning. They're learning from you, and that matters. So thank you for doing that, and so thank you to all of you who, after this call, are going to go to Honest Reporting. There's a red button there for subscribe. There's a green button there too. Anything that you can help is appreciated. Have a wonderful night.
Gil, thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully next time we'll have you here in person in Portland. And we just appreciate your experience and your knowledge. Thank you for sharing it.
Pleasure, Bob.
Thank you all for joining us.